Today, I'm joined by two excellent speakers. Our featured author is Sherry Thomas. Sherry is a USA Today best-selling author who decided that her goal in life is to write every kind of book she enjoys reading. Thus far, she has published romance, fantasy, mystery, and more. Her books regularly receive starred reviews and Best of the Year honors from trade publications, including such outlets as the New York Times and National Public Radio. She is also a two-time winner of Romance Writers of America's prestigious RITA Award. Her next book out in November is Miss Moriarty, I Presume. Sherry is being interviewed today by Alyssa Day. Alyssa is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author with more than 1 million books sold, and she writes the Warriors of Poseidon and Cardinal Witches paranormal romance series and the Tiger's Eye Mysteries, a paranormal mystery series. She has won many awards for her writing, including the Romance Writers of America's prestigious RITA Award for Outstanding Romance Fiction and the RT Book Review's Reviewer's Choice Award for Best Paranormal Romance Novel of 2012. So Alyssa, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks, Allison, for inviting us. This is really fun. I'm looking forward to talking to Sherry. We've been chatting back and forth about what we're going to talk about. And I got to say, listening to your bio, Sherry, we had the same goal in mind. Because since my first book came out in 2003, I have published in nonfiction, chick lit, paranormal, fantasy, young adult. So I think we both are pretty eclectic here. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun chatting. And I was so excited to read Miss Moriarty, I presume, because that's an amazing series. So welcome. You know, it's fun to talk.
Thank you. It's always fun to meet another reader who writes whatever she wants to write.
Exactly, because I read everything, you know, which I think a lot of our library patrons who are here are probably the same way. I mean, that's the joy of libraries. I know I grew up really poor, so libraries and librarians saved my life because there was no way we could have bought books. But every week my mom would take me and I would come home with my 18 books, the maximum allowed on my library card, and go back the next week for more. And I think, you know, librarians are the heroes of the book world, that's for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, folks in the US may not realize that how rich their library system is. Because when I was growing up in China, there may have been a city library, but I have never heard of anybody who managed to borrow a book from the city library. My little elementary school had a very tiny collection of books, and I don't think they loaned those out to the regular students either. And my grandfather was a professor at a medical college, and he was the only one of us who could actually borrow books from his college's library.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when I came to the States and saw just basically how many books there were in a little middle school, my mind was blown. My mind was blown.
It is, you know, I did think about that, but I grew up, my dad was in the Air Force. So I lived in the Philippines for 2 years as a child and in Turkey for another 2 years. And I don't think the library systems in either of those countries were anywhere near what we were, because I had friends, you know, who lived in the countries who were just amazed when they would come visit me at school and see what we had on offer. So
right.
We're very fortunate.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's very fortunate. And especially nowadays, I think through the pandemic, you know, I hear from my readers all the time that without books, they would not have survived this past year and a half, because it's been so rough for all of us. And it's been such an
It really has.
It's such a good way to get out of your life for a little while and go somewhere where you know things are going to end out well and happily ever after.
It really is. Right. Before, as a writer, all I really wanted was to entertain my readers, but now I sometimes feel like, oh, I'm being kind of useful. Yeah, because they would say, oh, you know, it really helped me through the worst part of the pandemic or something like that. I'll be like, oh, wow, you know, it's very happy, but also humbled feeling.
It is. It really is. And those emails you get when they say, you know, I took your book to chemo, or I got laid off and I've been reading, and I think it's an honor and a privilege to be able to affect somebody's life that way. Because
it really is.
You know, I grew up and that was something when I needed to get away from scary things, I could go and get into that book, and like I said, it saved me from a lot of things. So it's such a privilege to be able to turn around and do that.
Right. Even if your life is, you know, kind of normal, it can also be blah. And there's like great excitement. And sometimes, you know, if you chose the right book, great happiness in books.
Exactly. And if you're going to work every day, you're not riding a dragon, which you can go do in a book. So, you know, well, I mean, I guess at the theme parks or something. I live in Florida, so I'm not that far from Orlando. The Jacksonville Library, we're not that far from Orlando. So, you know, you can go there and ride a dragon or something. But in real life, in your commute, you're usually not. So it's a lot of fun. Well, tell everybody a little bit about your background, because I know when I was reading one of your books, your romance novels that won a RITA, I was so taken by the lyricism of your prose. It's really beautiful. It's almost poetic in some cases. And I thought,
Oh,
you know,
thank you.
part of this is maybe the translating from, because the lyricism of your native language into English. And honestly, I learned some Turkish, some Japanese, and some Tagalog, which is the language of the Philippines. There is no way I could write a book in any other language. So I am very impressed with you, trust me.
Thank you. I studied French for like 6 or 7 years in school, and I even lived in France for a year. Trust me, there's no way I can write in French either. So when I heard that, you know, Nabokov actually could write in Russian, French, and English, I was like, no way, no way. But yeah, English may not have been my first language, and I came to it not like slightly late. I was 13 when I came here from China, but it is now my primary language. It's my functioning language. It's the language I think in. So it's, you know, it's like my working language. That's. I don't think I can write terribly complicated ideas in Chinese at this point. I am trying, but I don't think. I don't think I would charge people for it yet.
That's interesting, though. Can you translate your own books? To do like
no,
the Chinese edition?
I have never okay. translated any of my books into Chinese. And I feel at this moment it's easier for me to translate from Chinese into English, because my English is better rather than the other way around. Yes. That's
where I am. I thought I would take a crack at doing my own French translations, but my French isn't nearly that good. I could the same with you. I could do from French into English, but so we were sort of joking back and forth when we were chatting about doing this talk, about what are the questions readers always ask us, since we're not there in person for you to hold your hands and yell out things. And one of them was always, where do you get your ideas? And so Sherry, where do you get your ideas?
And I remember telling you back, it would be more interesting if you asked me, where don't I get my ideas from? And so I can tell everybody very easily where I do not get my ideas from. I do not get my ideas from real life. Yeah, like never, ever have I gotten an idea from real life. I get my ideas from other stories, I think, more or less. If I see a story I like, then I think maybe this is what, you know, being a writer is like for all writers. If you see a story you like, especially if the story you love, a story that you're like kind of enraptured by, you just want to know, ooh, I wonder if I could do something like that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, at least that's how a lot of my books have come by. Sometimes they have come by because I didn't like the books I was reading. I think my first romance novel came about. My first romance novel had a plot where the young girl actually did something, I would say, borderline criminal to get her young man to marry. Certainly was unethical. Certainly was unethical to get her young man to marry her. And I did it because I was like, you know, I've never read a book in which a man thought a woman did something bad, and it's because a woman actually did do something not good. Yeah. I thought throughout my childhood, and I read a lot of romances in my adolescent years, thanks to libraries and university bookstores, where I just sat all afternoon and read books. And I read a lot of romances in my teenage years, and I never seen one such instance that wasn't a huge misunderstanding. Like the girl would always be pure as a driven snow, and it will always turn out that the guy's thinking terrible things about her, but he's just flat wrong. And I was like, what if he isn't, so pig-headed and arrogant about it? What if when he thinks she did something bad, she actually did? And what kind of book would come out of that? So it's always like what I read in other books that kind of in the end either turned around or written some other way that become my own books.
I think a lot of us do that. I know. Couldn't wait to go see Dune at the theater, because that book was like one of my major childhood. Anything Dune, anything Herbert Asimov, loved it. My childhood. I think I was reading Dune when I was 7. But I would read these books and I would think, well, there should be more like kissing. There should be more romance and not all these horrible, bad, unhappy endings where people die. Or I would read fantasy and think, well, why is so much of the fantasy always centered on the men in the fantasy? The women in epic fantasy were often, in the books I was reading, were often the wives or the queens or the healer who would sit in their little healing tent until the guys did something heroic. And I'm like, no, I want my characters who are female to do heroic things. And even the hero's journey, when I started reading about that and Campbell and all of that, it was always the hero's journey. And I thought, yeah, not so much. I'm somebody who always drove my own path. I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college. And then I went to law school, and I'm always like, go, go, go. And I wanted heroines like that. So I thought, well, I'll start writing those. And that, I think a lot of us do that. We find things in books that are out there or in our lives, and we think, it would be fun to write this. I would really like to read this, and I don't see it. So maybe some other readers would like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to your point about Dune, I think since you've definitely read Dune and probably remembered it pretty well, because I when other people were talking about Dune, they raised this point that there's like there will be this snippet from this history that somebody was writing, right? And toward the end, you found out, no, that's a guy, the hero, that's a girl the hero married, and that's like somebody he doesn't love at all. It was kind of like just marry for mere alliance. I was like, no,
right,
exactly like you said. No, why can't there be like a real romance? It's just like sometimes you just want to challenge certain assumptions. I have always like, or I should say, my friends have always loved the Veronica Mars series. Mm-hmm. And when they finally introduced me to it, I was equally blown away. And so when Veronica Mars, I think, came back to TV again, was like it was a limited series somewhere. All my friends who watched it were so angry. They were so angry with what happened at the end of that series, because basically they killed off the male love interest.
Oh no! Yes, I never watched that show, but I had heard people grumbling.
Yes, and that's why I didn't want to watch it at first. I wanted to see what other people were saying about it before I watched it. And they were so angry, and they said, according to the showrunner, he was asked about it, and he said he just felt that she couldn't both have this domestic felicity and be out there having adventures and solving crimes or whatnot at the same time. And I was just like, that is just a wrong assumption.
It's ridiculous.
Just a wrong assumption. Yes. Why does it have to be that a woman cannot have both?
Right.
Yeah. And I think
that's a great point. And I think that leads into the discussion really well about your series that you're writing right now. I love that you took Sherlock Holmes and flipped it. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to that? What made you do that?
Oh, well, like I said, I often am influenced by what I read. So I've always enjoyed Sherlock Holmes stories, but I actually encountered Sherlock Holmes stories written by people other than Arthur Conan Doyle around the same time. I was reading the original works. So, and I always I remember my first work of pastiche, Sherlock Holmes pastiche that I read was the 7% Solution, was translated into Chinese. I still remember reading it like lying in a tent, because it was at the athletic event and the athletes were in the tent, on this little mat, just waiting for my event, and I was reading it, and I had read I probably had already read the events of Reichenbach Falls and everything, and in this particular novel, they posit that his 3-year disappearance, which was disguised as a fall over just a plummet over the falls and all that, was actually, he was spending that time in a rehab to deal with his cocaine problem.
It wouldn't have been a bad idea, right?
And, yeah. And I remember just thinking as an 11, 12-year-old, I was like, this is great. I really like this take on the Sherlock Holmes story. So it may be heretical to say, but for me, it's always been true that as much as I enjoy the original stories, it's always the adaptations and what other people take on it that I like even more. And Laurie R. King, her book, The Beekeepers Apprentice, was the first time I basically saw a female Sherlock Holmes story, in the sense that she gave the original Sherlock Holmes a female partner whose mind works almost exactly the way as his does. And when I read that, I was, kind of just like blown away. And I was like, oh, wow, I wish I could do something like this. This is like so awesome. But I had never written a mystery at a point yet. So time passed by. By the time the BBC Sherlock came, I was like,
loved that.
Now I really wanted to do my own take on it. And interestingly, by that time I had written a mystery. The second book of my young adult fantasy series was a mystery. I didn't mean for it to be a mystery, but it turned out to be a mystery. And I thought it was, nobody guessed where the truth. Usually they were like, wow, that's, the big reveal at the end came out of nowhere, yet it was all there. It was a fair play mystery. So I thought, given that, I could try my hand at writing. And we already have Sherlock Holmes with a female partner. We already have Sherlock Holmes being modernized in 21st century in BBC Sherlock, and over on CBS, I believe they already made Watson a woman. So it seemed pretty obvious, like the only thing left to do was to make Sherlock Holmes a woman. And if you put that in the historical context, then it becomes very interesting question as to what kind of life would she have, and what kind of person would she become, even if she was born with the identical kind of like temperament and identical brain.
With the constraints of the time.
Exactly, her upbringing would have been very different, and the constraints she faced would have been things that would be things he could not comprehend because he's never had to deal with. So yeah, those became some very interesting driving factors in the stories. So.
I think that's fascinating. And to go back a minute for our audience, when Sherry mentioned a fair play mystery, this is the thing, because I write paranormal mysteries, and it's so crucial, and I know you'll appreciate this, that when you get to the end and you find out who did it, it has to have been true that the reader could have figured it out as well. If the clues aren't there in the book, then you cheated them. And it robs the reader of that fair experience. And I personally have thrown books across the room because the author did not do that, and there was no way it could have been figured out. And it'll be somebody, it's just, Deus ex machina or something. It's God is in the machine, and there was no way.
Right. And I regularly express my displeasure with the Murder on Rue Morgue, which was that famous Edgar Allan Poe story. And I will spoil it for everybody who haven't read it. After all that, intense and interesting building up, it was a orangutan. Okay, it was a orangutan. If I had read it in physical form, I would have thrown that book across the room. Yes.
Exactly. And what I love is when I get the letters from readers that say, oh, I was sure it was John, but then it was Dave. But then as soon as I saw it was Dave, I went back and said, oh my gosh, it had to be Dave, or whatever.
It was all the way there.
Exactly. It's all the way there. You have to have, and that's what's so much fun about plotting mysteries, is that you've got to have your red herrings. You've got to have your you know, your clues, but that aren't obvious. You've got to have, and it's a little tricky because there's only so many characters you can have in your book. So your reader's going, well, this character can't be there for no reason. It must be the bad guys. So there have to be reasons for every character. And every character in your book has to be three-dimensional. When I teach classes to aspiring authors, I'm saying, listen, you can't have what I call a cardboard cutout character, secondary and tertiary characters that you just trot in to be, you know, the comic relief or the best friend who never, they all have to be three-dimensional. They all have to have their own reasons for what they do. And so it's a fascinating sort of puzzle, plotting a mystery, and I really love it.
Oh, and speaking of, you mentioned comic relief. Our mysteries have rather different tones, and I think yours are more humorous. How does adding humor in change the way you write or plot?
It's interesting because humor is always my voice. So everything I write is some degree of funny. And the biggest comments I get on this mystery series, oh, I should say mystery series is the Tiger's Eye Mysteries. And this is the first one, Dead Eye, and you can get them at your library. But the biggest thing I get about my mysteries is I was laughing so hard I fell out of bed. Or I was laughing so hard my husband said, "What are you laughing about?" Or I was laughing so hard I snorted Diet Coke out my nose. And I love those comments because it's so special to be able to make people laugh. But what I have to do is I have to walk a careful line because in my very first mystery I ever wrote years ago, I had somebody who was a really, really nice woman who was sort of integral to the character set die. It's hard to be funny when you've had somebody really nice that everybody knows die. So I never did that again. Now it's some stranger that just is sort of off the page. And then the humor usually comes in through the secondary characters and their riffs. So this is about a woman who runs a pawn shop in a little quirky town in Florida with a bunch of paranormal characters. And so they'll bring in funny things to pawn, or, you know, there'll be a riff that can go be funny throughout the book. But it has to be balanced with the clues and the mystery and the danger, because there has to be danger and suspense if there's some bad guy running around, right? You can't ever let people, and I know you know this from reading your mysteries, you can never let people find a place that they're like, oh, okay, this is slow, I'll go do the laundry. Or I'll go turn on Netflix now, because there's so much other entertainment out there, not to mention so many other things we all have to do in our lives. If you lose them, you might lose them. So I love the emails that I get that are, you kept me up till 3 a.m. finishing your book, and I'm so tired at work. And I'm like, I love that.
But the good thing is these days with audiobook, people actually can do laundry and cooking at the same time. Because I was, you know, before I came out here, I was actually getting grocery out of the car and, you know, like chopping some onions, and I had an audiobook in. And you know, life is just more fun when there's a murder mystery going on while you're chopping onions.
I love audiobooks, and I didn't listen to them for the longest time because I'm like, I'm a reader. I've always been a reader. I read hundreds and hundreds of books in many, many genres every year. And so I was resistant to it until I started having books in audio, and then I had to listen to them, which is sort of odd, listening to your own. But then I started, and it's amazing. I love, you know, I walk the dogs with an audiobook. I go to the dog park with an audiobook. I do my chores around the house with an audiobook because, you know, I don't commute anywhere. My office is right here. So I find all the other excuses, and it's really great.
I always say my house is cleaner when I find a good audiobook. And the funny thing was I just took the audiobook right away. I just, you know, as soon as I heard, you know, there was something like this available, I loved it. The only thing is, like, sometimes you have a book that's too good, you want to keep going. You can't just, you know, yeah. But my younger child, when he was a baby, he did not want to be sung to go to bed. He did not want to be sung to.
So you would play a book?
Yeah, we used to lie down on the bed with him as a baby, as an infant. Like, I would put on whatever audiobook I was listening to, and we just lie there together until he falls asleep.
I think that's wonderful.
Yes, unfortunately, he did not turn out to be a literary prodigy as I was hoping at that.
My son is a voracious reader, and he's actually thinking about writing a book himself. So I'm excited. But my daughter's an artist, and she doesn't care if she ever picks up a book. So it's just, you never know with kids. They're going to do what they're going to do, right?
They can do what they're going to do. Yes.
Well, I don't know. So I'm trying to think of all the things that people have been asking me lately, so we can talk about it. It's been interesting, hasn't it, with Netflix and Hulu and Apple Plus and everything, seeing all the books that are suddenly starting to be made into movies. I think that's such a great opportunity for authors. And Julie Quinn is a friend of mine. And so it's been so much fun watching Bridgerton explode all over the world. And
I know. It's kind of like, it's amazing, because for so long, romance never had the kind of, big budget adaptations. I think even even like Nora Roberts, who had quite a few of her books made into TV movies, never had this kind of like budget, this kind of like basically serious treatment to it. And the first time it happened, boom, like this is what we get. So I am so excited for our material to be taken seriously as source of adaptation.
And it's so validating, because romance is more than 50% of book sales. And we've had this huge audience all these years of people that, are saying, we love these books, we love these books. And I think there was a little bit of, well, women read those books. And so they were treated not as seriously. And then for Bridgerton to blow up like this is showing that, yes, there's absolutely a market for this.
Yes. I wonder if people saw how, because on Netflix, I think because of Netflix, I have been exposed to K-drama, which, I wasn't before. And I think even before Squid Games came along, which is like...
Have you watched that?
We are in the middle of it now. But even
I'm afraid to. I heard it was all gory.
Well, no, it's actually not gory, but it's like the Hunger Games. It's like... And it's actually more realistic than the Hunger Games, because I felt like Katniss was never actually tested morally in the Hunger Games. Like really badly tested morally, to the extent that I would have expected from that premise. In the episode we watched last night, people were tested something awful, and it is kind of disappointing what some of them did. But until this point, all the K-dramas I have watched, all the very, very popular K-dramas, were absolutely first and foremost romances.
Okay.
They are other things too, but always the biggest overarching story is the romance.
Yes.
And they're different in the sense that they only do one season. They do one story complete, and they're done. They don't like keep coming back to the same people. They move on to different stories. And I wonder if, Netflix saw how popular that model was. And so, how much people love just like stories that are primarily romance, and just basically said, yeah, or maybe Shonda saw how much people loved it. Maybe Shonda loves it herself.
Well, it's interesting, because I think it's not just romance, but it's true in mystery, it's true in whatever we write. I think that being able to reach out and touch someone's emotions, the truth and the honesty of emotions in a book can really capture that reader and bring them back wanting more. And I know romance has feels and emotions for days, but as an author, you try to do that in all your books. And it's when the people come and say, oh, I'd like to live in that small town because there's a sense of family, or there's a sense of caring for your neighbors. And it's pulling those, because it's funny, I write paranormal things. So, there's going to be vampires and leprechauns and witches and whatever. But I always make the emotions honest and true. So you may never have met a vampire, but you will know what it felt like to have, your neighbor fall ill and everybody pitches in and takes over dinner or lunch or casserole or whatever, if you've lived in a small town like I did for a while. And so I think that romance authors are just spectacularly good at reaching in and pulling out the emotion and putting it on the page, where a lot of other authors try not so much to do that maybe. And that's what really touches people. That's what really pulls them in and makes them want to read more and more and more.
Right. Before I started writing the Lady Sherlock series, I started reading the Inspector Gamache books written by Louise Penny, set in French Canada. They are very popular series of contemporary mysteries. And what I realized as I read, book after book in the series was it's not so much the murder du jour that pulls me in. The murder du jour is just actually a reason for me to spend time with this community of people the author established in the book. So that's what I thought I wanted to do in my own series. I wanted to have that sense of community, and I think this is something that really resonates with people. That found family, the sense that we may have all been misfits, but we have found one another, and together we're not misfits anymore. We fit right in.
That's a great point. And that's the kind of book that draws me so much. My friend Jennifer Ashley writes this historical mystery series set in London. And instead of the protagonist being, fancy lords and ladies, the protagonist is a cook in a Mayfair house, so she's downstairs, she's the servant, and she gets into all this, mayhem and mysteries happen, but you want to know what happens to her assistant, to her friends, and to the butler that she's become friends with. And it's just, again, finding that circle of people that you're like, oh, I wonder what the housekeeper's up to these days. And you realize that author has managed to pull you in, not just to the mystery, which are always exciting and great, but to that feeling, again, as you say, of found family. And I love that, because that's a connection that gives people a community.
Right. I think these days it's like more important than ever that I be able to feel the humanity in the story. That there's I feel like some positive energy that, it kind of like make me feel like living is worthwhile. And the bad things that may happen to people, yes, it happens, but people can pull together, people can help each other out, and they can help themselves out.
Exactly. And in romance novels, one of the things I always do is that I find what my hero and heroine are afraid of the most, and then they have to work together to overcome it. And it's, that we're better with someone else. We're better with someone who has our back, with someone who is there for us. And that's never not true in life, I think. And it's been a scary time of not being able to hug people, not being able to be close, and the pandemic. And so being able to find that maybe in the books we read has been more helpful than ever.
How has the pandemic been for you?
Oh, I'm an extrovert, so it's been a little tough, not having in-person events, not going to conferences, not traveling. We went between, like when it looked like things were getting better and better, but before Delta variant kicked in, we went on a family vacation to Alaska, very, careful, socially distant, mask, out in the wilderness. So we weren't around a lot of people, and that was lovely, but it's been rough. I have depression. So there's been some ups and downs, certainly. And I know from what my readers tell me that it's been a hard time for a lot of people who are dealing with mental struggles. How about you?
I, on the other hand, feel like I've been training my whole life for the pandemic.
Introvert?
I am not as huge an introvert as some of my other friends are, in that I don't have to go immediately retreat back to a cave after spending time with people. But when I'm in a cave, I also don't need to come out either.
Yeah.
So you see how that is. Once the pandemic, once people have retreated into their own families, I have been okay staying there. So what do you do when you don't write? Do you live with somewhere where you can walk, where you can?
Yes. We're out in the suburbs. So, always walking the dogs. There was a lot of that, and going to the dog park and going to the beach. I'm only half an hour from the beach, and I love walking on the beach and things like that. So getting outside a lot is really important when it's not 110 degrees here, because it is Florida.
That's true. I was briefly in San Diego a couple of times, and when I was there, I realized, I am that basic bitch who enjoys sunset walks on the beach.
I love San Diego's weather. It's always perfect there. I mean, you know, other than the taxes and the fires and all of that, but the weather is amazing.
Yes, weather is great. Yeah. So what's next for you?
Oh, what's next for me? Okay, this is an exciting moment for me. I got to share this. So like I said before, Dune was one of my favorite books as a child. It was like an important book of my childhood. And my first in the Vampire Motorcycle Club series, Paranormal Romance, went on sale yesterday and hit the top number 53 in all of Amazon.
Awesome.
In all of the millions of books. And Dune was number 1. And I was like, I'm on a list with this book of my childhood. So that's exciting. And the next one is coming out.
That is awesome.
Next month. So tell me about you. What's next for you? And we got to take some questions after.
Oh, well, it's just the 6th book in the Lady Sherlock series is coming out. So I don't know. It's been ages since I checked my rankings on Amazon. So if anybody see it next to Dune, please let me know.
Well, you know, a sale always helps, right?
Yes, true.
No, are you still writing romance as well? Or are you sticking to the Lady Sherlock right now?
Moment, I am not under contract to write romances, but I might be writing some on the side. But it'll be very slow going. I think for the sake of my mental health, I shouldn't work because my books require many drafts to come out. So I'm actually even though it take a year, I don't get much time off during the year. So if I write more than 1 book at the same time, then basically I get no downtime. As soon as one draft for 1 book is done, I have to go to do 1 draft of a different book. So at the moment, I'm not taking any more, I'm not setting any hard deadlines for any romance novels. So just these mysteries for now.
And you have kids too, right? Young children.
Oh, no. Mine are quite elderly. I have elderly children. Yes.
I don't know why I thought you had young kids. Yeah, my daughter, my baby is getting ready to graduate from college. So
my younger one is in his 3rd year in college. So
okay.
I have elderly children. Yes.
Like me. So you have more time.
Oh
yeah,
yes.
It was rough in the beginning. My first book was published in 2003 and my daughter was 3. So, you know, it was tough back then when you got to be full-time mommy. Now it's like, wow, I have all this time.
I know. And it's like the best thing, for me, the most fortunate thing about the pandemic was that it happened after my kids were grown. So like, I always feel terrible for, you know, women or just parents with little kids running around all the time and they can't go out, they can't do their normal thing, they can't see their friends. I'm just thinking, my God, those poor parents, what, you know, they must be going through. And having to be teachers too on top of that.
Yeah, all that homeschooling, that would have been a little bit crazy. So tell people where they can reach you. Your website is?
My website is sherrythomas.com. I'm on Twitter as Sherry Thomas, on Facebook as author Sherry Thomas, and on Instagram as writer Sherry Thomas. What about you?
I'm at alyssaday.com and I think everything's listed on there. I gotta admit, this is hilarious, but I just discovered TikTok and it like suits my crazy personality so much because I think if I weren't a writer, I would be a professional organizer or a stand-up comedian. So I'm gonna start doing TikTok videos just because. So my kids are like, oh my God, we're gonna be so embarrassed.
No, you go where you have fun. It's like
Exactly.
I hardly ever take photos of myself. So, you know, videos will be like, yeah, asking too much of me. So there's no way I'm getting on TikTok. But I feel like if you like it, by all means do it.
Well, it's interesting. The book side of TikTok, book talk, they call it, is not all about like doing silly dances and stuff. It's about talking about books, you know, and giving recommendations and, you know, and doing fun things about books, and which is totally me. I love books. I love talking about other people's books because I read so many of them. So I thought this might be fun, and especially trapped in my house until who knows when we're finally all safe to go out again. Do we have, I'm looking over here. Okay, here's the question.
As a writer, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
As a writer of historical romance and historical mystery, how do you go about researching the time periods of your books?
I rely on Google Books. I rely so much on Google Books. There was a time period, I'm thinking it was like late in the previous century or very in the like first year or two of this century before Google Books came along, when I used to have, when I actually got myself a public membership at like UT Austin's library. And I used to have to drag a suitcase like every few weeks to go there and get those research books back, and have to remember to renew online when renewing online wasn't such a quite, that simple a matter. I think I used to have to enter all the long code,
Oh, wow.
by hand. That was like, yeah, that was like before. So now Google Book is like just so awesome because you can, and especially since I write the late Victorian era, it's the Victorians love to write about themselves. They love to write about, our London, and, they love to publish train schedules and all those other things. So it's like everything is there. And also my friends have access to like, the 19th century newspaper archives and other such things. So it's like, yeah, it's a really good time to be a writer of historical fiction, especially if you have, like I said, access to also the newspaper archives. What is the next genre that I want to write when I'm done with mysteries for a while? Gosh, I don't know that I will be done with mysteries for a while. I hope to keep writing the Lady Sherlock books for a while. And I would like to write more romances. And I'm a slow writer and I am an idea poor writer. So between the two of those, that's gonna keep me quite busy enough for the next 5 to 7 years. and we'll worry more about that after the next 5 to 7 years.
Think about it then. What are some authors or series that you recommend and enjoy reading yourself?
Let's see. I believe I have mentioned the Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. And I believe I have mentioned the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes books by Laurie R. King. I also enjoy like I said, I always enjoy when romance pops up, especially like if I'm not looking for romance, exactly. There's this series of young adult books that I always recommend. They're written by Megan Whelan Turner, and the series is called the Queen's Thief series. And the first book is pure fantasy. I mean, all the books are fantasy, but in book 2, such a love story leapt out and slapped me upside the head that, sometimes I still think back of it in wonder. I remember that moment when my jaw dropped, like, holy smoke, like these two people are going to be together. So I always want other people to read it and experience that for themselves. And also, do you remember way back when on All About Romance, they used to have a section of readers submitted Desert Isle Keeper books?
No, I don't think I saw that.
Okay, so I used to go through those readers submit Desert Isle Keeper. I mean, some writers used to. I think Lisa Kleypas recommended The Shadow and the Star, and that was how I discovered Laura Kinsella. And one person had recommended this book called Goldy Nights. So I picked it up from the library, and it was like, I could not get through like 5 chapters of it because it's about this college reunion back in the 30s or something, 30s or early 40s. And everybody, it was like a women's college, and everybody was known by 3 things. Sometimes they were referred to by their first name, sometimes referred to by last name, sometimes they were referred to by their titles, the professor, the bursar, the this and that. And I was like, who the heck are all these people? So that book was called Goldy Nights. So I returned it to the library going like, I guess people who liked it for a reason, but I have no idea why I should read it. And then I was reading Golden Age detective fiction and got into the Peter Wimsey novels by Dorothy Sayers. And then I realized, oh, there's actually a few books of his that were like a romance going between Peter Wimsey and this woman named Harriet Vane. And I read 2 of them and I was like, this is good. Like, what is the third one? Oh my God, third one was Goldy Nights. So,
Oops.
But you know, I guess I'm somebody who reads for the ship, right? So I actually went back to the library, dragged that book out and made it through the opening chapters when I could not figure out who was who. And when I got to the back end of the book and the romance got going, was like, so good. So people, if you have got a thing for unexpected romance, give that a try. Let's see. How did the idea for my Sherlock Watson to be a retired stage actress? Well, I don't know. It was kind of years ago. I think with Mrs. Watson, I just wanted her to have lived. And back then, if you lived strictly as a lady, you really would have only seen a very narrow slice of life. Like, I mean, you could have experienced all kinds of pain and tragedy and disappointment too, because, you know, mortality and whatnot in the Victorian era. But really, you would have seen a very narrow slice of life. And I wanted her to have much wider experience. I wanted her to have made her way herself, come up in the world, having had to rely on herself, on her own wits. And so that was where the idea came from. I didn't want her to have lived too respectable a life, but I also didn't want her to have had like so gritty a life that she was like terribly damaged in the process. So that was where it came from, that she was like kind of a musical theater actress who also, you know, took wealthy men as protectors once in a while.
As one did.
As one did. Yeah. Do you write every day? No, I most certainly do not. I enjoy not writing.
Yeah. Oh man, it would be awful to write every day.
I really enjoy my days off. And if made into a movie, who would play your Sherlock? These days, I think if anything gets made, I think it's much more likely to be made into a series for the streaming services, right? And less likely to be a feature film. My Lady Sherlock, I actually don't cast. So folks are welcome to suggest, and the last time somebody made a suggestion, I really liked it. It's Florence Pugh, who was in the
I love her.
The new Little Women series, Little Women movie, and Midsummer, and she is
Black Widow's sister.
Black Widow's sister in the Black Widow movie.
Yeah,
yes, she was so good. How does one start writing? Well, if one has a computer, one simply open it and use the most handy word processor. That was how I did. I was never much of a pen and pencil writer, but you can also just grab the nearest notebook and start writing. There is, if you have an idea and if you want to write, then in that case, the only thing standing your way might be your fear of starting, or your fear of, you know, not actually being able to write a whole book, which is okay, because it takes people differing amount of time to write a whole book. And some people, or you can start writing a small story, a short story first. What do you think, Alyssa?
Absolutely. And I think people say, I have an idea for a book. Well, a book is really hundreds of ideas. It's not just one idea. But if you have an idea, for me, like usually we'll start with a character. What if this warrior from Atlantis came to Earth? You know, what if, and I'll have a character and I'll start thinking of things the character might do. So if you write little, you know, paragraphs or a short story about a single character, and then you'll start thinking, well, what if this character got into this trouble? Or what if it got into that trouble? Because conflict is the heart of all books. I had one friend who was trying desperately to get published back in my beginning days. And I kept having to tell her, Diane, you're too nice. So she couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand it if any of her characters had a fight or got in trouble or was any kind of conflict, and she would resolve it on the next page. So her whole book was people being nice to each other. I said, this is really sweet, but it's really going to be boring. You know, conflict is the heart. So think of a character, think of a trouble she can get into. Think of how she might solve it, and then think of 3 other ways she might solve it, because the first way might be too obvious. Think of who might be against her solving it and how they would butt heads and what would happen then. And then just noodle around and noodle around, but don't put the pressure on yourself right from the jump saying, oh, I'm going to sit down and write a 400-page novel, because sometimes that can overwhelm you to the point where you'll just go back and watch Netflix for another 6 months.
Also, don't be afraid to imitate what you love. Don't be afraid to like write something really similar to what made you want to start writing in the first place. Because, you know, artists, when they first start in the craftsman part of their training, what do? They are asked to copy very often, like they go to copy like those masterpieces of art, right? They copy them. So in copying them, they study composition, the use of color, and all those other things. I'm not an artist, so I could be talking out of my rear end, but I do know they copy. There's actually nothing wrong with, you know, practicing it as a writer that way. If you love someone, try to write like them. You know, whatever it is that they do really well that you love. If they have the kind of plot twist that make you, jump out of your chair, try to copy that. If they have prose, you can try to, like imitate their turn of phrase. Copy them. Don't be afraid. Like, because in the end, as you develop, you will move away from that copying into your own voice, your own style. But it does not hurt at all to start by, writing like the one, to actually emulate the ones you want to emulate.
Absolutely. Or even when you're learning and practicing and just writing for yourself, I know several writers who wrote fan fiction when they were first teaching themselves how to write. So they would decide that Harry and Hermione should have ended up together in the Harry Potter series. So they would write a little short story where that happened and Ron went off with somebody else, and, just whatever makes you happy, and then you'll learn as you go. You mentioned that you don't get ideas from real life, Sherry, but does real life ever sneak into your books anyway?
Not in the way, I try not to use the details of my life. And in fact, I'm like actively, like I would turn away from it, using like details of my life in my book. It just something that's, that I instinctively turn away from. But, things
historical events that are
not really that, but real life kind of sneaks into, like, I feel like if you write long enough, what you like and what you hate kind of come across.
Yes.
For example, I love cake. So it does come across in my books.
Me too.
Yeah, things like that will sneak into your life. And let's see what else. I love the southwest coast of England. I love the footpath that so when I look back at it, I'd be like, hey, this is like the third time in my books I'm on the southwest coast of England, just because I like it so much. Let's see, who do I banter ideas with during my work process? Just myself, I'm afraid. I don't have, my critique partner sees my work only when it's near a final draft, when I need help like polishing it up, mostly for story structure and for what will work on the skeletal level of a story. I write a short draft, I write 20,000 words and then be like, is this actually where I want the story to go? Is this what I want to happen? Which is currently exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking a percolating break. Like I said, not writing every day. I'm taking a percolating break to let myself see, what the real shape of the story ought to be and what really ought to happen instead of what I thought was going to happen at first. What was the name of the fantasy romance series? The Queen's Thief series. And it's written by Megan Whalen Turner. And if you read book 2 and are not shocked by the romance, come to me. Because seriously, I have still not read a love story in the romance genre that is the equal of that in terms of, you know, how gobsmacked I was. What do I hate? I don't hate things very easily. If I don't like something, typically I'm just like feel more like apathetic toward it. But there are certain things that I really hate. Cruelty, for example. I really hate when like people not just being not like if people are just being angry and saying, you know, shit, that's one thing. That's not the kind of cruelty I'm talking about. Like real cruelty, real malice, and when people don't think of them, when people, and hypocrisy, when people like would treat others the way they would never allow that they themselves to be treated. Those are the things I like truly hate.
Do we have any more questions, anybody? Allison, you want to pop back in?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Sherry and Alyssa, so much for coming and talking with us this evening. This was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed it a lot.